To a zoologist, all animals are equal, and that includes even you and me. Here in the Mediterranean, about 7 years ago, I was sitting talking with a friend, and I was pointing out to him the way in which people behave. I said, look at that woman over there. She's folding her arms in a rather unusual way. And that couple over there, the way they're gesticulating could only come from this part of the world. And the way that old lady is clasping her hands. And as I was talking, he said, you know, you look at people the way a bird watcher looks at birds. And I said, yes, I suppose, in fact, you could call me a man-watcher. Wherever people gather in public, the man-watcher can find something of interest. It's not a question of invading privacy. A bird watcher doesn't study birds in order to learn how to shoot them down. He does it to understand them, and it's the same for the man-watcher. Let's do a little man-watching along this waterfront. When the boys start eyeing the girls, the bonds that tie the boys together are going to come into conflict with the new boy-girl attachments. One solution is to make the first tentative contacts rather offhand and jokey. The intimate act of touching a girl's hair is mocked by the way it's done. But already a bridge is being built which will carry the young males away from their male friends and into the more isolated world of the pair bond. There's nothing jokey now about hair stroking. It's a visible act of loving. During the intense phase of pair formation, there's a great deal of head touching. We're very defensive about the head region, and allowing it to be touched is a sign of great trust. Even when walking, head contact still manages to resurface from time to time as the couple progress in a semi-embrace. Body contacts of this kind, the hair touch, the heads together, the embrace, and so on, are called tie signs because they signal the nature of the tie that exists between the different couples. Here's another head contact, a kiss this time, with a pat on the bottom as a reply. The lovers' hand-in-hand contact is slightly less intimate, but still tender, perhaps because it rekindles the protective feeling of holding hands with a loving parent. The arm link signals a more established pair bond, with the female taking symbolic support from the male's arm. Older couples with a long-term pair bond often abandon body contact altogether when walking along side by side. But in very elderly couples, the arm link often reappears now as an act of genuine rather than symbolic support. Those two men on the left are sitting in exactly the same posture. Now, this is called postural echo. We often do this unconsciously when we're being friendly. This man and woman have different leg postures, but watch what happens when they start talking. The man is becoming friendly, and as he does so, shows that he's like-minded by becoming like-bodied. He does this by shifting his legs and adopting her posture, slipping into a state of postural echo. We also echo each other in another way. We demonstrate our friendships by wearing the same kind of clothing. We could call it costume echo. In this way, jeans and certain kinds of shirts or sweaters become almost a kind of uniform. There are no formal rules about what we must wear, but informal, unwritten rules operate all the time. It's impossible to wear any garment without making a statement of some kind about our social bonds of friendship or allegiance. Now let's look at something called the intention movement. The man on the left wants to end the encounter with his friend. He glances at his watch. The friend ignores the signal. So the man adopts the intention posture of rising, pressing his hands on the bench and leaning forward as if to push himself up. Still, the signal is ignored. Now he actually rises, and his friend can't ignore that, so he in his turn glances at his watch. The standing man now hitches up his trousers, signalling that he's about to walk, and at this point his friend looks at his watch again, this time actually checking the time, and the encounter is at an end. Most people who study human behavior seem to concentrate on human motives and thought processes, but the Manwatcher is more concerned with human actions. Despite mankind's great advances with abstract ideas and manufactured objects, we remain nonetheless creatures of vigorous animal action. And the best way to appreciate just how active we are is to speed it up a little to make it unfamiliar. We decided to use the speeding up process throughout a 24-hour period in the life of a young girl. If in a moment we watch her everyday actions at about 5 times normal speed or more, it will soon reveal the immense amount of movement and postural change that the human body is subjected to every day. Even a supposedly quiet event, like having breakfast, then shows itself as a prolonged series of jerks and starts, flicks and turns, as the body machinery deals with the problem in hand. At work, the pace hots up a little, even though the task here is not one we'd call energetic. It's easy to see where headaches come from. The head and neck, the eyes and mouth are in a constant state of tension and shift. If work is tiring, it's easy to see why. But what does she do to relax when work is over? More activity, and now more vigorous than ever. We evolved as a high-activity species, and today, even though we may have our material needs satisfied, so that we no longer have to hunt or search for food, we still feel the impulse to go out into the open air and indulge in activity for activity's sake, as if obeying some ancient impulse to keep ourselves moving. Another ancient impulse, and one we share with our close animal relatives, is the urge to groom and be groomed. Monkeys and apes spend a great deal of time grooming one another's bodies, and the human animal, whether primitively tribal or highly civilized, follows the same pattern. Even here, where we may feel passive, we're still surrounded by vigorous actions, and our eyes, particularly, threatened by close attention, are working overtime. Much of our eating behavior is a social activity, and when we combine feeding with socializing, we do so in about equal proportions. During this 1-hour meal, she puts food or drink into her mouth 149 times, and she looks at her companion 166 times. He performs 110 feeding and drinking actions, and looks at her 150 times. And there's an interesting sex difference here in the way they drink. Although they swallow about the same amount of liquid, she takes 48 sips to do it, while he takes only 27. The large gulp seems to be a masculine act for some reason or other, and I suppose that's why beer drinking is a largely male pursuit. Another difference is that during this 1-hour meal, she touched her head 29 times, while he touched his only 9 times. hand-to-head movements have such a strong female bias that female impersonators often use stylized hair-patting actions as deliberate signals of femininity. Self-touchings of this kind are essentially self-comforting, so it would seem that women today are slightly more in need of comforting than men. Dinner can be a prelude to more vigorous activity. At the end of such a day, one might imagine that the body was ready for total immobility, in sleep. But what happens if we reduce 8 hours of sleep to 1 minute? What you're about to see is genuine sleep, not simulated. And as the girl slumbers, you see something that she herself has never seen or known about, the body movements of sleep. Each of us, every night, makes between 40 and 70 body shifts. Nothing like the level of daytime activities, of course, but activity nonetheless. The resting body still needs movement, movement that avoids cramped limbs and that rests each part of the body in turn. Many actions we share with other species. For some people, direct comparisons of this kind are insulting to human dignity. To others, they're merely amusing. But the Manwatcher is quite serious when he sees people as animals. For him, this approach is in no way degrading. Whether we like it or not, we are animals and should be studied as such. But this doesn't mean we're the same as other animals. Every species is unique. Basic similarities may exist, but the details are very different. Even when looking at something as basic as maternal care of the young, where the actions of loving are so strikingly similar from species to species, caution is still needed with every comparison we make. You'll see what I mean if we take a closer look now at the human face.
O sola mia, stam pronta te, o sola.
Like other primates, we have evolved a complex set of facial muscles, the muscles of expression. And the human face is without doubt the most expressive in the entire animal kingdom. But if we think that our expressions have the same meanings as those of monkeys, we'll misread many monkey expressions. Each species has its own language of facial signals, and we have to learn each one the way we would a foreign language. Only when it comes to hostility do we seem to share the same kind of faces.
You are not telling me what you want for. You have your root, I have your mind, and you cannot sacrifice, okay? And that's it.
But let's concentrate now on ways in which human actions are especially and uniquely human. One of the ways in which the human species has come to differ from his close animal relatives is that he's reared up onto his hind legs. His front feet no longer stay on the ground. It feels very strange if you keep your hands flat on a surface like this while you're talking. You want to bring them up to gesticulate, because hands don't only manipulate objects, they also gesticulate and move about to emphasize the words when people are speaking. These actions of the hands are called baton signals because they beat time like a conductor with his baton. And as I talk, I emphasize my words with my baton gestures. So you've got a whole system of hand movements which accompany speech. But they don't just reflect my emphases, they also indicate something about the mood that I have as I speak. And that is done not by the rhythm, but by the posture of the hand as I gesticulate. For example, there is the imploring hand, the calming hand, the precision grip hand, the power grip hand, there's the hand scissor gesture, and so on. Many different postures for these baton signals. And for the man-watcher in the field studying human behavior, it's fascinating to see how many of these different baton signals he can see as he watches people talking to one another in the street, or here, what you might call the very temple of gesture, which is the Galleria Umberto in Naples. No one knows quite why it is that Italians and other Mediterranean peoples gesticulate so much more than populations living further north in Europe or further south in Black Africa. It's as if gesticulation reaches a peak around the warm shores of the Mediterranean Sea. But whether the reason is climatic or historical, we don't yet know. The man on the right is performing a forward rotation gesture, circling his hands to express some ongoing process or idea. Let's have a look again in action replay. There it is, an urgent, impatient gesture. The older man in this group, the one with the walking stick, is in a forceful, rather hostile mood, and he uses the hand repel gesture as if about to push someone away from him. There. He's obviously in an agitated mood, and his gestures are working hard to capture his companion's attention. The downbeating fist is another hostile power gesture. Down it goes again, and he uses his stabbing forefinger as if it were a dagger thrust down into his opponent's body. There. A more delicate gesture is the precision grip, with the thumb and forefinger tips touching, as if holding some small object with great precision, emphasizing that a fine point is being made. The posture of prayer, hands flat together, is used as a beseeching gesture. I pray you, I beg you. There's the imploring hand, palm up. And in a moment, you'll see another popular one, the hands wash gesture, a sign of pleasant anticipation. There it is. But what's he anticipating? Now we know. And so the gestures continue, all over the Galleria Umberto, with hands flicking and dipping, swishing and twisting, like 100 conductors with an invisible orchestra. Much of a Manwatcher's time is spent sitting at open-air tables, sipping coffee and watching the passing scene. I must confess, it has certain advantages over the birdwatcher's equivalent of a damp, cramped canvas hide. Baton signals may emphasize words, and they may reflect the mood of the speaker, but they don't replace speech. We do have other gestures that do that, of course. The simplest are the mimic gestures, where I would mimic shooting a gun, putting food in my mouth, drinking, or asking for a cigarette. Now, these mimic gestures occur all around the world, and people understand them all around the world because they are just imitating simple actions. But there's another kind of gesture which is much more local and much more variable. This is the symbolic gesture, a gesture which indicates some kind of abstract idea, like, let's say, craziness or lunacy. I may do this, or I might do that. In another region, I might do that for the same thing, meaning crazy, or I might do that, or this. Some of these gestures for crazy you'll understand, and others you won't. Now, as you move around the world watching these gestures, you see the way in which some regions are very rich in them and others not so rich. Here in Naples, we find the richest area of all. When these Neapolitan musicians take time off for a drink, their hands are so active you might imagine you're looking at the official deaf and dumb language. But all their gestures are purely colloquial and have no written rules. As an attractive girl walks past, the usual ribald comments lead to a whole series of symbolic gestures. These gestures are so complicated that a group of Oxford research workers has spent several years making a detailed study of their origins and their history. It helps a little if we damp down the sound so that we can concentrate entirely on the movements. I'll try and explain some of them using action replay. There's one called the moustache twiddle. There it is. It's a relic of the time when men preened their waxed moustaches as a sign of arousal. And that is a local gesture meaning you're crazy. You have a tiny brain small enough to hold between my thumb and forefinger. And in a moment, you'll see the gesture of making a scar on the cheek, meaning he's artful, crafty, a scar-carrying member of the gang. And there's the ear flick gesture, meaning you're effeminate, you ought to be wearing earrings. And here's what's called the cornuta, the horned hand that means you're a cuckold, your wife is unfaithful to you. So one insult after another is pouring forth in the symbolic gesture language of Naples. Now he greets a friend and changes his mood, giving the side pull gesture, there, that means everything's okay, fine, great. And here's one last insult, called the teeth flick gesture, meaning I'll give you nothing, nothing but the dirt from under my fingernails. All around Naples, on every street corner, the baton signals and the symbolic gestures are going on hour by hour and day by day. Wherever we look, we see hands moving, faces changing expression. Naples is, without doubt, the gesture capital of the world.
Sì, vabbè, ma ci sta qualcuno che non ci... Vabbè, ma questi vengono qua, fanno il comodo loro, se ne vanno e noi non riusciamo...
Ma aspetta, le autorità, chi per esso dovrebbe venire? Come autorità? Lo Stato, lo Stato. Tutto quello che tu mi stai dicendo, che chi sti qua, sono tutti ricciù e tengono il corpo. capisci? Te ne sono riccione, non mi capita ancora, che sono riccione. Sono riccione a tenere il corno tutto quanto.
This is the Neapolitan way of saying no, with the head tossed backwards. Northern Europeans don't use it, so it must be a local gesture. But how local? This is the Massico range of mountains in Italy, between Rome and Naples. Now, people on both sides of these mountains have the same language, they see the same films, the same television programs, yet despite this, they show some remarkable differences in the way they gesture. In fact, you could call this range of mountains a gesture frontier. In the villages on the right, below the mountain range, people toss their heads backwards when saying no. The head toss, also found in Sicily and Malta, came originally from ancient Greece. Above the mountain range, people shake their heads from side to side when saying no. The Greek gesture never crossed this range of mountains, where over 2,000 years ago, the Greek colonization of Italy stopped. Sometimes, as you travel from place to place, it's the gesture that stays the same, while the meaning changes. In most countries, when I jerk my thumb up and down like that by the side of the road, the driver knows that I'm asking for a lift. It's a hitchhiking sign. But in other countries, it's a very rude sign indeed, and if I did this at a passing driver, if he did stop, it would be to punch my nose rather than to give me a lift. In those countries, you hitchhike using a flat hand. You don't jerk the thumb upwards. A number of gestures change their meaning in this way as you go from place to place. This one, for instance, the OK sign in England, changes in southern France. It becomes zero. It means worthless, really just the opposite. In Japan, it means money, because it changes to the sign for a coin. And again, in other countries, this sign can be very, very rude indeed, just like the thumbs up. Another gesture that gets people into trouble because it has different meanings is the victory sign, the V for victory, which doesn't always mean victory. In Britain, when the V sign is given with the palm of the hand held towards the gesturer, it's a rude sign. But this meaning is hardly known in other countries. Outside Britain, it's the same as the politician's victory sign, used first in 1941 by Winston Churchill. He was a great gesturer, but even he, in the early days of V signing, sometimes got it the wrong way round, and inadvertently made a rude sign at his troops. One of my favourite places for man-watching is at an airport. There are many ways of greeting friends in different countries, but some of the basic patterns show little variation. Let's have a look at the way the new arrivals behave. From the snug privacy of their airplane seats, they suddenly find themselves, as it were, on stage, in front of a large audience. This makes them slightly self-conscious, and it's intriguing to see the way they deal with this before they come close enough to be able to pick out the faces of their friends. There's a predictable pattern here. Let's have a look at it on action replay. First comes the long-distance wave to the crowd in general. That's followed by a baggage adjustment phase. She busies herself so that she's preoccupied and has an excuse to look away, until she's close enough to direct her waving at the friends that she can now identify as individuals in the sea of faces, and can give them the close quarters personal wave. Here's another arrival, and there's the long-distance wave, to what to her is still a mass of faces. Now the pattern starts to repeat itself. She's now well into the baggage adjustment phase. Although the hand luggage is obviously heavy, it will somehow magically cease to be a problem the moment she recognizes her relatives. There, and goes into the close quarters personal wave. The next phase of the greeting ceremony is actual body contact. Despite the metal barrier, bodies are flung together in tight embraces, embraces which recreate the warm animal security we knew as infants in our mother's arms. Seldom do people display such intense body contact with their relatives. In a sense, they have to make up for all the minor intimacies they've missed while apart, adding them all together as one major intimacy, the greeting display. Sometimes, emotions become so intense that weeping occurs, and this brings home the fact that human greeting displays are basically the same as farewell displays. These people, just a few steps away in the departure hall, are saying goodbye. It's as if we're seeing the whole greeting sequence put into reverse. With farewells, the weeping comes first. Then there follows the close quarters personal wave. And in this case, an unexpected chance for a last fleeting moment of body contact. And finally, the long-distance wave from the aircraft before takeoff. Ordinary family greetings and farewells involve people of roughly equal status, and the actions are the same for both greeter and greeted. But when one person is of much higher status, then differences begin to appear. The lower status person often shows some degree of body lowering, the basic submissive display of our species. Mild body lowering takes the form of bowing or curtsying. The submissive body goes still lower if the greeted being is godlike or actually is a god. Even the full kneel of the Christian is surpassed by the body-lowering actions of some other religions. For the Muslims, 3 times a day and 7 times a week, there is the kneeling prostration display, with the body being lowered so far that the head actually touches the ground. Short of flat prostration, this is as submissive as the human body can get, and it reflects the great power of the deity. If low status means lowered bodies, then high status means raised bodies. There are several ways in which the powerful or dominant human can express his elevated role. Here, even while sitting, he towers over his followers. Wearing tall headgear also gives a greater apparent body height. High hats are common amongst the military as a method of making the human animal more impressive. And this is a device that's not escaped the attention of the most dominant members of the clergy when in full plumage. Sportsmen, at moments of triumph and despair, adopt appropriate body postures. Sunken heads making the body lower, and raised arms making it taller. Apart from raised arms, there's also the device of leaping upwards as a height increaser, or of being carried aloft momentarily. It's clear that the moment of triumph is a moment of instantly raised status that demands a body posture to match it. The overarm blow of the clenched fist is a special action sometimes seen during triumphant moments. This is an ancient attacking movement of our species used from childhood onwards. It may be employed symbolically as a visual signal there, or it may be used as a savage blow during informal fighting. It's this overarm blow that reasserts itself whenever an adult human loses control and reverts to a primeval condition. One of the ways we prevent aggression from erupting is by our territorial behavior. Territoriality is essentially the sharing out of available space. I'm boss in my space, and you're boss in your space. Now, there are three kinds of human territory. The simplest is personal territory. The personal space that, like an invisible bubble, we each carry around with us and which says, come no closer. Even in a crowded street, we still manage somehow to respect one another's personal space, and by a deft series of maneuvers, make our way through the human traffic without colliding. And we take all this for granted, and it's only when we watch the process speeded up that it strikes us as a rather remarkable achievement. The second form of human territory is the family territory. The home base, owned by a family unit, is a typical pattern of human habitation all around the globe. And when that family unit sallies forth into the world outside, it often tries to establish a temporary home base from which to operate. This is easy to study on any crowded beach. Now, there are still a few gaps left on this crowded beach. And to find them, the new arrivals will have to wend their way through the already established territories. The usual pattern is for an advance guard to forge on ahead, carrying the traditional territorial marker, a beach umbrella with which he will soon be performing the characteristic umbrella display. Other new arrivals are approaching fast, and there's no time to lose. Watched warily from the sea by an established male territory owner, the advance guard is about to make his territorial site selection. The trick is to find a position roughly equidistant from the centers of the other territories to create the perfect balance in spacing out. The ground is tested, and it's almost as though we're looking at a group of explorers who have trekked across thousands of miles of wasteland, and now they're going to plant a flag to claim the ownership of this vital piece of land. Oops, that's too rocky. There's the perfect spot. As yet, no one in the party has removed their beach robes. They don't feel sufficiently at home yet. First, they must perform the sand covering display with any objects they happen to have with them. And then, finally, the climactic moment, the umbrella display. At last, they can start stripping down to their bikinis. The patch of shade formed by the umbrella display will now be ignored as they make their way to the sea or lie in the sun to get a tan. Its function is essentially territorial. When they leave their new home base, they know that the place they have reserved is safe because each family group respects the demarcated territory of the others. Suitable gaps are getting scarce now. Latecomers are forced to make do with smaller and smaller spaces. These are often difficult to reach and require help from nearby territory owners. Now at last the sand covering display can begin. Back at our first site, the umbrella shade patch is now totally deserted. But the latest territory seekers are keeping their distance, an ever-shrinking distance, as the beach fills up. They're forced to squeeze themselves in between a massive tent display on the right and a modest towel display on the left. We seldom stop to think that it's territorial sharing of this kind that prevents summer beaches from becoming a chaotic battleground. Another temporary form of territory is the motor car. It's almost like a portable home. And when people sit in their motor cars, although they're in public and perfectly visible from the outside, they behave as if they're in private. The sense of territorial ownership and security they get from being inside their cars makes them behave quite differently from, say, standing on the pavement. They would never do things like this outside on the street. In fact, the inside of a car seems to be psychologically as private as the inside of a bathroom. And finally, there's the third kind of human territory, tribal territory. For thousands of years, large human groups have come together in the form of audiences, crowds, assemblies, or throngs to reaffirm their sense of communal identity, their feeling of tribal belonging. Long ago, it was here in the Colosseum that the Romans came to cluster together on the terraces. But today, it's to a different arena that the modern Italians go every weekend. This is not merely a sporting event. The blessing of the ground, the chanting of the crowd, the synchronized movements of the fans, and the noise of the trumpets and the drums spell out one major social message. We belong to this group. We are members of this tribe, and we have a distinct tribal identity. In an increasingly homogenized, uniform world, this kind of group display is an act of rebellion against the global planners, the bureaucrats who would like to turn us all into identical, passive, computerized units. Each region has its own special displays. The British rituals differ from those on the Italian terraces. In Britain, there are three major displays to be seen. The horizontal scarf display maximizes the showing off of the tribal colors. Then there is the overhead clapping display. Several varieties of this with different rhythms. The most amazing thing about this clapping, revealed by new research at Oxford, is that it's synchronized to within 1/64th of a second. Not bad for what some people call a disorganized rabble. And thirdly, there is the scarf rotation display, sometimes with vertical jumping added for good measure. For the Manwatcher today, the football terraces provide a tribal display as colourful and as impressive as anything ever encountered by anthropologists in faraway places. The trouble with homegrown behaviour patterns is their familiarity. We take them so much for granted, and it's this process that the Manwatcher is trying to reverse. It's his aim to render the familiar unfamiliar by looking at it in a new way, and to enjoy the wonder of the commonplace.